Howdy everyone. This is the first one that I'm trying live. As you know, I've done a series on 8 best practices for global patent portfolios, particularly for hardware startups. And I haven't done any of them live yet. So we're going to try this out, and if this works, I'll continue to do them live. Alright, I've got the chat up. I'd encourage, if anybody is watching, if anyone has any questions. The reason why we're doing this live is I'd like to be just a little bit more interactive if folks would like to come with questions. Making this more like a conference roundtable discussion than just me throwing up a LinkedIn video every now and then. So in our first one, we spoke about one of 8 ways, best practices, to optimize your global patent portfolio, particularly for a hardware device. Now, we talked about U.S. filings. We talked about not making your U.S. non-provisional the first thing you file. If you want to hear more about that, go back to the prior video, kylewgraves.com. You can find it on LinkedIn. You can find links to it on X, but everything's compiled at kylewgraves.com. Now this week we'll get into point number 2. And I wanted to query whether or not perhaps if your hardware device is a medical device, you've thought through the jurisdictions fully, the jurisdictions where perhaps because of some specific things affecting the medical industry, you may not receive appropriate advice, or the conventional advice may be a little bit short-sighted. So the punchline is, if yours is a medical device, consider the medical tourism jurisdictions as places to extend your patent rights when you're doing the international filing stage of the patent process. Now, there's an analog for other types of hardware devices too. Of course, if you're doing a semiconductor device, you may consider the manufacturing hubs in Taiwan in a way that if you're doing a conventional hardware device, you may not. There may not be a big market there, but there's a lot of manufacturing there. Well, in the same way for medical hardware devices, don't forget the medical tourism countries. These may not be significant markets for you, but there may still be significant value in protecting your device there, because these markets will develop over time if you gain appreciable market share and your medical device becomes something everyone's interested in. I find that high-tech patentees often focus on the United States, the European Union, and the larger Asian jurisdictions. And these are typically appropriate for patent protection. But for medical device patentees, I'd like you to also think about emerging markets in Central America. Consider South America, the Middle East, Southeast Asia. These are all hotbeds of medical tourism, and many of these countries have particularly formal procedural requirements that make the patent process tricky. Now, as we already mentioned before, you consider beginning your patent journey with a cost-effective PCT application to preserve your rights early in a lot of jurisdictions, and then you delay the national filings in these smaller markets while you navigate regulatory approvals. Now also, while you're navigating these approvals, you're likely using your device in actual procedures and other valuable medical studies in regulatorily less complex markets. And you're doing this before you seek regulatory approval in the more complex markets where you have a larger potential customer base. So, in these instances, there's always a balance between protecting your medical hardware device while yet allowing for iteration during regulatory review, medical study, and other pre-approval processes. Often the initial product rollout, if it's conducted in a less regulatorily complex jurisdiction, becomes a part of this balance, even if those jurisdictions aren't prime revenue markets for the product, or maybe not even are identified when you initially file your first patent application. So, once again, I'm encouraging you, filing a PCT application affords innovators an option to secure rights in these initial markets and to operate across many jurisdictions without harming their long-term potential patent protection in the primary jurisdictions where you're going to have your most revenue growth. This is more flexible than attempting to identify your global market before your product has reached your global market. So that's a lot of words for one punchline. Consider those medical tourism jurisdictions. They're smaller. They may not be the most economically viable locales, but for a hardware device, and particularly a medical-related hardware device, very interesting. It might be worth your while. Now, next week, next Thursday at 3 o'clock, we'll talk about point number 3. It's another point in our series on 8 global best practices for protecting hardware devices. Some of these are universal points, some are medical oriented. But I think they'll be instructive for anybody developing actual things. If you want to chat more, reach me at kylewgraves.com. I'm looking through the chat now, and it doesn't look like we have anything right now. So if you come up with something later, shoot me an email. Thank you for your time.